Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching vSphere command line interface options. In this lesson, I'll start off by talking about why you should be interested in administering vSphere from the CLI to begin with. From there, I'll cover 4 different vSphere CLI options, including using the ESXi command line called Tech Support Mode. I'll cover the different types of commands you'll find inside the ESXi console. I'll talk about getting started with Power CLI and show you the Power CLI command line as well as the free Power CLI GUI. I'll cover Project Onyx and demo for you how it can help to make Power CLI scripts for you super fast. After that, I'll show you how to download and install vCLI, the vSphere command line interface. And then finally, I'll show you how to install and the basics of using the vSphere Management Assistant, or VMA. So with that, let's get started. The most obvious question when it comes to using the CLI with vSphere, I think that people start out with, especially if they came from, let's say, a Windows Server background, is why would I want to use a command line interface when there's a perfectly good graphical interface provided by VMware in the vSphere client? Well, there's a few different reasons that you should be interested in learning more about the command line interface. And that is, first off, it can be faster when it comes to administering vSphere. Of course, once you get over that initial learning curve, once you know all the commands and you just have them memorized and you can whip out some commands and get something done, it can actually be faster in many cases to use the CLI than it is to actually click through multiple things inside a graphical interface. Also, scripting for frequent tasks or mass changes, also known as automation, can save you a huge amount of time. I mean, for example, if you had, say, 200 servers to edit the configuration on and make some change, you don't want to do that in the GUI 200 times. You want to write a script to make it faster and easier. You can also use scripts or the command line interface to integrate with other products. So maybe you have a network management system and you want it to trigger to do something in vSphere when something happens in the network management system or vice versa. So integration with other products is a great reason to learn more about scripting. And then finally, because it's cool. I mean, once you've mastered the GUI, what else is there? Well, you need to move on and master scripting and master command line administration of vSphere. Now, over at VMware's website, vmware.com/go/sysadmin-tools, they actually have 4 different options that they recommend for command line administration, or automation as they call it. The first one is the ESXi Tech Support Mode, or Remote Tech Support Mode, which is actually just SSH. And this is formerly known as the hidden ESXi console before it was actually supported by VMware. Of course, previously with ESX Server, we had a full Linux-like service console. So it had a ton of commands and a ton of scripting options. But with ESXi, we have just this very slimline, it's actually BusyBox Linux console with just a handful of commands. So this is now fully supported and called Tech Support Mode if you access it via the console, or Remote Tech Support Mode. And I'll show you how to use those here in just a second. The second option is Power CLI, which is really Microsoft's PowerShell. So if you're a Windows admin and you're used to using, or at least if you're familiar with the concept of PowerShell, so from your local computer, you've got a command prompt and you can use PowerShell to perform commands and script things in the Microsoft Windows infrastructure, as well as third-party products. Power CLI is the exact same thing, but for your vSphere virtual infrastructure. So in this video, I'll be showing you how to download and install Power CLI for vSphere, and then I'll even show you a free Power GUI, a graphical interface that'll make using Power CLI so much easier. And then finally, I'll show you a free project from VMware Labs called Project Onyx, which will actually take what you do in the graphical interface and automatically create Power CLI scripts for you. So you don't even have to write them for yourself. The third option is the VMware CLI, or the vCLI as they call it. This is actually administering vSphere from Windows, but it has its own set of commands similar to what you would find on the ESXi console, like the ESX config commands and the ESX CLI commands. Still, VMware is pushing Power CLI much harder than vCLI because Power CLI is such an industry standard thing, because it's based on PowerShell. So vCLI is an option for you, but I think that Power CLI would be the better option to choose if you had to pick just one. And then finally, and fourth on the list there, is the vSphere Management Assistant, or VMA. So Vima is a Linux-based virtual appliance that you import into vSphere, and then it gives you really like the old ESX service console, but it's in a virtual machine, and then you can use it for command line administration of your ESXi servers. Again, you can find the links to all these different options over at vmware.com/go/sysadmin-tools. But now I'm going to cover them one at a time. So let's start with ESXi tech support mode. Tech support mode is really a command line interface at the ESXi console. So this is now fully supported by VMware. It's okay to go in there. It's not some secret thing. And then they have a remote tech support mode, which is really the exact same command prompt, just via SSH. So they don't use Telnet because it's unencrypted and in clear text. They use SSH because it's secure between your local computer running an SSH client and the ESXi server, which is really running an SSH server to supply the remote tech support mode. Now you can enable tech support mode and remote tech support mode both on the ESXi console via the direct console user interface or via the vSphere client for each ESXi server. Now before we go into tech support mode, I first want to give you a heads up on the types of commands that you'll find in there. You'll find the traditional ESX server service console commands that start with ESXconfig-**. However, those ESXconfig commands, according to VMware, have been deprecated or discontinued, and they recommend that you use the new ESXCLI commands instead. ESXCLI commands allow you to do just about anything in vSphere, so it's like one command that does everything, and it's really very cool. I'll show you both of these, so at this point, let's go over to an ESXi console, and I'll show you how to enable tech support mode and remote tech support mode. Here I am on the console of an ESXi server, and to enable tech support mode, I'm just going to press F2. I'll go ahead and log in. And then if we scroll down to troubleshooting, that's really where you enable and disable tech support mode and remote tech support mode. I'll press enter on the troubleshooting options, and then you would go in here and where it says enable ESXi shell, that's actually tech support mode. So all you do here is press enter, and you just enabled ESXi shell or tech support mode. And then the next one here is enable SSH. I'm just going to press enter on that. And there we just enabled remote tech support mode. So honestly, it's that easy to enable these things. The next option down here is modify ESXi shell timeouts. And really, this is just the amount of time before someone who's logged into the shell is automatically logged out. I can press enter on that here. And by default, there is no timeout, but you could set a timeout, for security purposes. I'll press escape. And then the other thing you can do in here is to restart the management agents. And you can do that for safe measure if you want, but it's really not required to enable or disable tech support mode or remote tech support mode. I'll go ahead and do it just for fun here. Okay, and we restarted the management agents. So I'll press enter there. I'll press escape. And now let's go ahead and test out tech support mode. So to go into tech support mode, you hold down the Alt key and you press F1. That brings you to the ESXi console, and then you just log in here with the root username and password. And there you go. You're in tech support mode. So this is the ESXi shell, as they call it as well. So to run the commands that you would find in here, you can go into cd into /sbin, and if you do an ls in here, you can do ls esx *, and there's all the ESX config commands. So I could do something like // for the current directory ESX cfg -nix and press enter. And then it tells me all the command options for that. So I can press up arrow here, and then let's do a -L to list. And there I get a list of the network interface cards on this ESXi host. So that's just an example of the ESX config commands that you find in there. Then the other command that I talked about that's new and even more important to learn probably because the ESX config commands, as they say, have been deprecated, is ESXCLI. So I'll just type in ESXCLI and press enter. And here we get the format or the help information for using ESXCLI. So let's say that we wanted to do ESXCLI space, and then I'll do VM for VM operations. You can see all the available namespaces, as they call them, basically the different categories that you want the ESXCLI command to work in. So I'll do ESXCLI VM and press enter. And then here I get a list of the commands available for the VM namespace. And I can either do a kill or a list. Let's do a list first. And if there were any virtual machines running on this host, you'd actually get a list of the virtual machines. However, I can tell you, to be honest, this is a brand new ESXi server I just added, so there's no virtual machines running on it. So let's pick a better example for this brand new ESXi server. Let's do ESXCLI, and I'll do network, and press enter. And then I can choose from the available namespaces. So network has more namespaces than the virtual machine command did. So let's say I wanted to do ESXCLI network space IP and press enter. And then here, notice the available commands are get or set. So I can get the global IP settings here by just typing in get. And it says that IP version 6 at this point is disabled. So at this point, it's just giving us whether or not IP settings are enabled or disabled. Let's do an up arrow, and then I'll do IP interface. I'll choose another namespace, and now I can choose from IP version 6 or IP version 4, or I can even do a list. So let's do a list at this point. And there I get some useful information. I get information about the VM kernel 0 interface. What if I did an up arrow on that, and instead of doing a list, if I did IP version 4 and press enter, now I can get IP version 4 information, and I can actually see the IP address for the VM kernel interface. So what if I wanted to do a set there? I could do a set, and then I could, let's say, change the IP address of the VM kernel interface on this host using the ESXCLI command. So I think you get the point there. This command is very intuitive. If you don't know the next command to type in, just leave it blank, press enter, and it'll actually tell you the different options that you have to choose from for that namespace or that command set that you're using. So that's the ESXCLI command. We covered the ESXconfig commands. Now some of the other things you might want to do here, for example, I'll clear the screen, is you can actually do a PS or a process list. So you can do like traditional Linux type commands, even though this isn't really Linux. This is a version called BusyBox. And I could use commands here like kill. I can go in and I can edit files, let's say in Etsy. I can do ls-l. I can cd into, let's say, the SSH directory, ls-l. And then I could edit a file in here, like with VI. So I could do sshd config, and then I could use VI here to edit a file. So I'm not going to go into using VI, obviously that's too much for this lesson, but I just wanted to give you some examples of the different things you can do in here. And then to get out, I'll type exit. So I logged out, and then I'm going to press Alt F2, that's Alt and F2, to go back to the direct console user interface. I'll press escape here to log out of that, and then here we are back in tech support mode. So not only did we enable tech support mode, but we also enabled remote tech support mode. So let's say I want to use remote tech support mode because I'm not at the console all the time. So to access that exact same command line interface, you would download a free SSH client from the internet like Putty. In fact, I've already got Putty installed. Let me open up Putty for you. So here's Putty, and then I can just type in the host name or IP address of that ESXi host. I'll type on ESX4 and press enter. And this brings up the SSH command prompt. So it's the exact same thing again. I'll type in the root username and password, and there we go. I can cd into sbin, do an ls-l, esx asterisk. There's all the ESX config commands. There's ESXCLI, so on and so forth. So it's the exact same command prompt, just in a remote mode. So that's tech support mode and remote tech support mode, very useful ways for administering and troubleshooting an ESXi host. Now let's move on and talk about another way to administer ESXi or vSphere from the command line, and that is PowerCLI. So like I said, PowerCLI is using Microsoft's PowerShell with vSphere, and basically you just download a Windows PowerCLI installer, and that gives you a command prompt. And that command prompt, although be it useful, is a little bit intimidating because you just have this blank command prompt. It's not very helpful. But one of the really cool ways that makes Power CLI so much easier is to use Quest's free Power GUI tool. They have a Power GUI that's free, and then they have a Power GUI Pro that has a fee, but both of them are very useful. They come with a lot of pre-created scripts. They can help make using Power CLI so much easier. Now, to use Power GUI, you first need to install Power CLI. So let me go over to a folder where I've already downloaded vSphere 5 Power CLI. I'll show you how to install it and access Power CLI, and then we'll go through the process of downloading and installing Quest Power GUI. In this folder, I already downloaded from VMware.com the VMware Power CLI version 5. This is for vSphere 5. You do need to upgrade your Power CLI if you already had it installed and used it with vSphere 4. So I'll double click this installer. It tells us that the VMware VIX will be installed automatically along with Power CLI. I'll say OK here. From here, it's pretty much your standard Windows installation. I'll just click Next here. I'll accept the default location and click Install. In just a minute here, we'll have a Power CLI command prompt to our vSphere infrastructure. And with our Power CLI installation completed, I'll click Finish here. And to use Power CLI, just go down to your Start menu, All Programs, down to VMware, and then you've got a new folder here called VMware Power CLI. And then you've got quite a few different options underneath here, but you want the VMware vSphere Power CLI. Click on that. And then here you get the Power CLI command prompt. Now we have a big warning up here about script execution and signing, and that's one of the first things you'll have to learn about when you get started using Power CLI. In this lesson, I don't have time to go into how to use Power CLI. It's a whole nother topic, but I do have some resources I can recommend you to here in just a minute. Now that we have Power CLI installed, let's go back to our slides and learn a little bit more about the Power CLI GUI option. Now, besides the standard Power CLI command prompt, I mentioned that there's the free Power GUI tool that makes using Power CLI so much easier. Let me go over to my web browser and show you where I downloaded it. This is where you download Power GUI from powergui.org. Of course, they also have the Power GUI Pro that has a price, but it has a lot more functionality as well. So all I did is click here and I downloaded the latest build of Power GUI, which is compatible with vSphere 5. And then I've gone ahead and installed it, and it's just a new Windows application down in my Start menu. Let me start it up here and show you what it looks like. This is the free Power GUI administrative console that allows you to use Power CLI from a graphical interface to administer vSphere. If you notice on the left-hand side here, there's a drop-down for VMware, and there's all sorts of pre-built scripts. You can perform mass changes in vSphere, you can run reports, and even perform best practice queries with the scripts that are included with Power GUI. If you plan to use Power CLI to administer your virtual infrastructure, I highly recommend that you download and install Power GUI. Also related to Power CLI is a free tool from VMware Labs called Project Onyx. This free tool actually shows you the Power CLI commands for the configurations that you perform when you're using the vSphere client. So it'll actually write the Power CLI scripts for you just from you performing your typical administrative task in the vSphere client. So you can download it from labs.vmware.com/flings/onyx. There's a graphic of what it looks like there, but let me very quickly show you Project Onyx in action. When you download Onyx from labs.vmware.com, you'll have this zip file right here. So if you just unzip the zip file, you'll end up with a handful of files. And there's actually no installation to be done. All you do is you run Onyx just like that. You'll accept the Tech Preview license. And then this is Project Onyx. So what you do here is you click the big asterisk up here to connect. And then you'll type in the name of your vCenter server. Then we'll check here to launch the client after connected. We'll say we're going to use the VMware VI client. I'll enter my administrative username here and password. And then what Project Onyx actually is a proxy server for the vSphere client. So it's going to launch your vSphere client, but it's going to point that vSphere client to the IP address here of Project Onyx on a particular port. And then Project Onyx will in turn connect to the vCenter server. So everything you do in the VI client or the vSphere client will go through Project Onyx. Notice over here the output mode. There's actually even different output modes besides Power CLI. I'll show you that in just a second. I'm just going to click Start here. And then notice how it's launching the vSphere client to this IP address, 192.168.168.1. It says it's not secure, but that's okay. It's all local traffic here. I'll say yes. Notice it's going to HTTP : and then that IP address, 1545. Okay, so it brings up my vSphere client for me, but let me restore this and actually resize it a little bit so we can get both of these on the screen. Okay, so I've got Project Onyx on the left-hand side and my vSphere client here on the right-hand side. And then what I'm going to do is actually click play over here in Project Onyx. And even though the vSphere client looks like it's connected just to my vCenter server, it's actually connected to this Project Onyx proxy server, which is then in turn connected to vCenter. So let's say that I go and I right click on a virtual machine. I say I want to edit that virtual machine. I go to the CD drive, and then let's say that I change this to a client device, and I say OK. Look what happened over here in Project Onyx. I get all this Power CLI script, and then I can actually take this script and I can save the output on the screen right here directly to a PowerShell file. I can put it on my desktop and save it and call it modify CD drive on a virtual machine. Say OK. And I just created a Power CLI script that I can actually go now and edit with the Power GUI. I could very quickly modify it and then have it go and modify other virtual machines' CD drives. So that's just an example of something that you can do with Project Onyx. It automatically creates Power CLI scripts for you. It's really super cool. If we do a drop down here, notice it can even create raw SOAP messages, C#, and a VCO JavaScript output for you. But primarily, I'm interested in using it for Power CLI because it's really so powerful to use upon there. So that's what Project Onyx can do for you. Let's go back to our slides. And before we move on to other CLI options for administering vSphere, I want to first mention some Power CLI resources that you should check out. VMware offers this very cool Power CLI poster that you can actually print. I'm sure they'll be giving away some at VMworld. They also have it in a different format that prints it on individual pages that you can use for reference. But it's an awesome way to learn about Power CLI and even put on your wall to brag about what a cool Power CLI scripter you are. Another great Power CLI resource is the VMware vSphere Power CLI reference by Luke D., Alan Renouf, Jonathan Med, and a couple other super smart guys there. The forward is even by Dr. Stephen Harrod, VMware CTO. It's a big, thick book, and it's a great reference tool for Power CLI. And then one of my personal favorites to learn Power CLI is the Train Signal video training course covering Power CLI. It's by vExpert Hal Rottenberg, and it's an excellent resource that goes into using and administering your vSphere virtual infrastructure through the Power CLI command line interface and automation tools. Moving on from Power CLI, another command line interface for vSphere is VMware's vCLI. This is called the vSphere CLI or vCLI, and similar to the Power CLI installer, it's a Windows application that gives you a command line interface for ESXi and vSphere. And what it does is it really gives you the ESXconfig and ESXCLI commands locally on your Windows computer, on your Windows desktop. So I've already downloaded it for vSphere 5, and let me go over to the folder where I put it, and let's install it, and I'll show you how it works. Here in this folder, I've got VMware vCLI version 5. I'll just double-click that, And here we'll perform a quick Windows traditional install. You see here the vCLI command line interface installation wizard. I'll click Next. We accepted the license agreement. I'll take the default destination folder and click Install. With the installation of vCLI completed, I'll just click Finish here, and then I'll go down to my Start menu, down to VMware, and then notice we have a new folder here called VMware vCLI, and the only thing in there is the command prompt. I'll click on the command prompt, and then we get a command prompt, and notice how we're in Program Files, VMware /VMware vCLI. If I do a dir here, we've got 3 folders. We've got bin, Perl, and ppm. Let me expand this window out and make it bigger so we can see more. And at this point, I should point out there's a Perl directory here because vCLI is based on Perl. So if we cd into bin and do a dir, notice all these esxconfig commands here and viconfig commands. They're both Perl commands, and they're basically the same, although there's a few more viconfig commands than there are esxconfig commands. But notice how they all end in .pl. So they are Perl commands. They look very similar to the commands that you'll see over on the ESXi console interface. So let's say that we wanted to run esxconfig-nix, the same thing that we ran over on the ESXi console interface. I'm going to do esxcfg-nix.pl and press Enter. Now we're prompted to enter a username. So this is going to be the ESXi server username, let's assume, because we're going to connect directly to an ESXi server. I'll type in the password there, and it gives us an error. Well, that's because the host is not a vCenter or an ESX server. In fact, we didn't even specify a host. So let's try it again. This time, let's type -help. And now we have some help information to help guide us. So instead of just pressing enter like you would over on an ESX console, you can actually type -help here with the vCLI in Windows to get help information. So it tells you the command string here. Basically, you put in the options and then the arguments after that. So the command string would be esxcfg-nix.pl and then -- the name of the server, -- the username, -- the password, and then whatever command you want to specify here, like -l for list. So let's give it a try. Actually, I'm going to press up arrow here, and instead of -help, I'm going to do -- server, and then I'll type in esx3. And you don't actually have to specify the username and password on the command string because it'll prompt you for it. So really all I have to specify here is -l to list. I'm going to press enter. Again, it asks me for the username, the password, and there we get a list of the network interfaces on that ESXi host. So again, you've got the esxconfig commands, viconfig commands. You also have esxcli. That's actually an executable. It's not a Perl command. So I can just type esxcli, press enter, and here I get all sorts of help information about esxcli. You don't actually have to do -- help with esxcli like you have to do with the Perl commands. So again, vCLI has very similar commands to the ESXi console, and it can be useful for administering ESXi servers and vCenter from your local Windows computer. All right, moving on from vCLI, let's now talk about the last CLI option in this lesson, and that is VMA. VMA is actually the vSphere Management Assistant, or VMA, and it's a Linux-based virtual appliance that has basically the vCLI already in it. So the things I just showed you in the vCLI that you could run from your Windows computer, all those are inside VMA already, as well as something called FastPass authentication that allows you to authenticate once and then perform multiple commands across, let's say, multiple ESXi servers. So you'll find the exact same esxconfig and esxcli commands for administering vSphere inside VMA. And it's actually a virtual appliance, so the deployment of VMA is really easy. You just download it from vmware.com/downloads, and I've stored it in a folder, and let me show you how to deploy it in vSphere, and then we'll power it up and run some commands using VMA. Here's the folder where I downloaded Vima. You can see here it's a 543 megabyte zip file. I went ahead and extracted it into this folder, and as you can see, it's a group of OVF files, and the biggest file really is the VMware virtual disk file. So if you were using Vima before and you had Vima version 4 or you already downloaded that, you do need to now download Vima version 5 because you need to keep your version of Vima in sync with your version of vSphere. So to deploy Vima, I'm just going to go over to my vSphere client. And then here in the vSphere client, I'll go up to File and down to Deploy OVF Template. I'm going to paste in the path right here to find the file and click Browse. It is underneath a Vima folder, and there's the Vima OVF that we looked at earlier. I'll click Open here. I'll click Next. It recognizes it as the Vima Virtual Appliance version 5 for vSphere 5. I'll click Next here. Accept the license agreement. Click Next. I'll change the name to just Vima version 5. I'll put it in the Hilton Head, South Carolina inventory location and click Next. Then here we've got the HADRS cluster we're going to store it in. And then specifically, I'll put it on host ESX1. I'll put the new Vima Virtual Appliance in my WiredBrain Coffee Company data store cluster and click Next. We'll use the thin provisioning option and click Next, and then take the default network. Click Next here. We'll use a DHCP IP address. Click Next and Finish. At this point, the 500 megabyte virtual machine file is copied over the network to our ESXi server, and in just a minute here, the new Vima Virtual Appliance will be created. With the Vima 5 deployment successful here, I'll click Close, and then I'll right-click on the Vima 5 virtual machine and power it on. I'm going to click on it here, and then let's open up the console. And then here in the console, we're prompted first to change the IP address configuration. Like I said earlier, I'm just going to go with DHCP for now, but I do recommend you set a static IP address. So I'll press Q and enter here. And then we're prompted to change the VIadmin user password. The VIadmin account is like the root account for Vima. You can't actually log in as root. You need to log in as vi-admin. So first it asks for the old password, which this is a default account and there is no old password. I'll just press enter here. And then it asks for a new password, and I can tell you Vima is extremely sensitive about complexity of passwords. It even checks them to see if they're dictionary words and everything. So you have to come up with a rather complex password to make this work. So I'm going to type in train signal with a capital T, and then a number, and then an exclamation point. And now let me see if I can recreate that. There we go, success. That was one of the hardest things actually in getting this Vima Virtual Appliance started, is multiple password retries. Now here we are on the Vima console, and as you can see, it's got an IP address via DHCP, and Vima version 5 is actually fairly different from Vima version 4 in the sense that you can manage the Vima virtual machine by going to a web interface. If you point your web browser there to that URL, https:// the IP address and then :5480, it'll actually bring up the same virtual appliance that you might have seen in my lesson when I deployed the vCenter server appliance. So you can use that web interface to configure automatic updates, to change the IP address, to change the time zone. So it's really very cool. Of course, you can log in to the Vima Virtual Appliance directly here on the console as VIadmin. And then here we are logged in as VIadmin, and I can do things like ESX CLI, ESX config commands, but I highly recommend you learn about using VI FastPass. I don't have time in this lesson to go into a complete Vima training course, but I want to show you the documentation because it's extremely helpful when it comes to getting started with Vima and configuring FastPass. This is the vSphere 5 Documentation Center here, and they have some really nice doc on getting started with Vima where they cover not only deployment, which I already covered, but also configuring the VMware console and web interface, connecting to it, enabling Active Directory authentication, adding target servers to VMware, which has to do with FastPass, running the vSphere client for the targets, reconfiguring the target, modifying scripts, configuring automatic updates, and so forth. So there's a lot of great info out here on VMware. But in general, you'll find that it works very similar to the vCLI, but by configuring FastPass, you can enable VMware to be able to automatically authenticate to ESXi servers to perform the same commands that you would normally have to run one at a time on each ESXi server and authenticate individually. So to summarize, that's the vSphere Management Assistant, or VMA, a very cool tool to allow you to centrally manage your ESXi servers from the command line, and it's a great central repository for scripts that you would run to perform mass configurations across all your ESXi servers. So with that, let's go back to our slides. And that brings us to the summary for this lesson. I started off by pointing out how administering vSphere using the CLI is an important skill to have. It can help you to be a faster, more efficient admin, help you to perform mass configurations and automate the virtual infrastructure, and even integrate vSphere with other tools. I covered the 4 different vSphere CLI options. First, ESXi tech support mode and remote tech support mode. We talked about the ESX config and ESX CLI commands. I showed you how to download and install Power CLI, the Power GUI, and even Project Onyx before we moved on to the vCLI, and then finally installing and using the vSphere Management Assistant, or VMA. Thanks for watching this lesson covering vSphere 5 command line interface options.